Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be. We are in the wake of Gimel Tammuz Shloshim Shana, the 30th anniversary of the passing of the Rebbe. And we're going to learn now the Maimer that the Rebbe said 40 years ago on the Shabbos before Gimel Tammuz, which by divine providence will be the Maimer for those who are following along and learning the Torah that was exactly 40 years earlier, in the most in proximity to Gimel Tammuz. And there are some phenomenal things in this Maimer that are unusual for a Maimer of the Rebbe, and with God's help we'll point it out. And it's almost uncanny that this is the thing, some of this that the Rebbe said in the time that we would be learning exactly 40 years later, when the Torah has the special energy and effect of Adar Boim Shnin Lokoy Minish Adai the Rabbi, but it's 40 years later one could really start to get the Torah of a Rebbe, and that this would be the Shabbos before the 30th Yortzeit. Okay, let's get straight to it. V'hoya Meeday Chodesh b'chodshei Meeday Shabbos b'Shabbatai Yovei kol bas l'shtach v'yislefonai Amar Havayim. So the Maimer begins with a verse that you read when it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and although that Shabbos, by the way, was Parshas Chukas, and this past Shabbos was Parshas Koirach, like we've discussed many times, it was the day of the month and the week was the same, but the Parsha was different. But nevertheless, the Haftarah was the same both now and 40 years ago, because it was the Shabbos of Rosh Chodesh, and then we read a special Haftarah. And the Rebbe is going to talk about that here too. So the end of the Haftarah reads, and not the very end, but the Rebbe will talk about that too, because we also read a piece of the Haftarah of when Shabbos would fall out in Erev Rosh Chodesh, as we'll soon talk about. So it's Isaiah 66, and it will be every single month on Rosh Chodesh and every Shabbos for Shabbos, every individual, every person of flesh will come bow before me, says God. So this is the verse in the end of the Haftarah of Shabbos when it coincides with Rosh Chodesh. And the connection to Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh is quite simply because Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos are both mentioned. Chodesh b'chodshei v'Shabbos b'Shabbatai. Every month on the Rosh Chodesh and every Shabbos for Shabbos. So it's explained in the discourses and the Mamorim of our Rabbi, starting with the Alter Rebbe and Likutei Torah, and in the subsequent Mamorim of the Rebbe afterwards. The Shabbos in Yonehu Halo Milma'ato L'Maylo. Shabbos we elevate. The whole idea of Shabbos is to elevate everything. The mundane becomes holy, and to lift everything up from below to above. Ascension. The B'sheish is mei bereishis hoyi b'chinas hislapshus ein sof ha'mayis b'asiyah gashmis. So in the 6 days of creation, especially in the original creation, in the 6 days, so the infinite of God was really involved and enclosed in creation, in the physical world. V'achakach b'yem Shabbos, afterwards, on the day of Shabbos, ksiva yichul ha'shamayim v'oretz chol tzavam, like we say in the Kiddush every Friday night. The day of Shabbos, everything was complete. Everything had its fulfillment. So the heaven and the earth and all of its hosts, vayechulu miloshin kiloyin, and vayechulu also comes from the term that also means something that you want, that you lost, you yearn for. And it's complete because it's the way you want it. You fulfill the goal. The Shabbos nechlalim ha'elim is b'bechinas hamachshava. On Shabbos, everything is in a deeper sense, in the sense of thought. So thought being a much deeper and intimate part of the person, connected, and Shabbos, everything is elevated to that level. And just like it was the first time, the first week of creation, that's how it is each and every week, every single week. In the 6 days of work and of action, the godliness in the world is in a way of involvement in action and deed. And the day of Shabbos, it ascends to the idea of a world of thought, where it's more intimate, the thought process, not so much action and deed, which is higher than the world of action and deed. This is all the way Shabbos would be in relation to the weekdays, the mundane. But now you have the idea of Rosh Chodesh. What's Rosh Chodesh? The first day of every month, special day. Rosh Chodesh is a whole different thing. It's unique because it's festive, and at the same time as being festive, it is also mundane. You're allowed to do work, as the Rebbe will explain. On Rosh Chodesh, one is permitted to do work. It happens to be, parenthetically, that women of the Jewish people accepted upon themselves to have rest, an additional rest, although you could, of course, do things like turn on a light and get in a car, etc., but to refrain from certain types of work, arduous work, laundry, sewing, things like that. And they were actually given this because, as a reward for not participating in the sin of the golden calf. So it's an extra Yom Tov for women as a reward. But that being said, melacha is permissible, just not the hard, laborious tasks is what's the custom not to do. That's just parenthetical. But nonetheless, it's permissible to do work. But still, it's considered a special day, right? Remember the Rosh Chodesh treat some people used to get something. It's a special day. It's not just your regular day. It's not just your run-of-the-mill day. It's Rosh Chodesh, special day. And as the prophet says in Ezekiel, when it talks about the dimensions of the temple, so says God, the gate of the inner court, which points inward, it'll be closed on the 6 days of work, meaning on the 6 days of the week. And then, but when will it open? It'll be open on Shabbos and on Rosh Chodesh. So it's as if to say Rosh Chodesh is not considered as a regular work day. So we can understand this with an analogy from human beings who live here on the lowly earth. Our speech and our deeds and our actions, in a general way in most cases, they are a result of our emotions and feelings, and then those are translated into how we act. So our characteristics dictate our deeds. Because you feel a certain thing, so that you speak about it. And this also includes intellectual topics and ideas. So, hainu lav davke seichel shebeteira, or yafilu seichel mechachmas ha'elam k'mechachmas ha'tchuna v'chachmas ha'refuah. So, when you have an idea, an intellectual idea, and not even necessarily something in an intellectual idea of the Torah, even an intellectual idea from general wisdom in the world. For instance, like the different astronomical equations and medical knowledge, medical wisdom and astronomical wisdom and other engineering type things. And here the Rebbe says parenthetically something, and like we've mentioned in the past, this was only a little over a month after they began to learn the Rambam, after the Rebbe's Takana. He instituted to study every single day 3 chapters of Rambam. And if you can't study 3 chapters, 1 chapter, or the mitzvah that's studied in the 3 chapters in the Sefer HaMitzvahs. And the Rebbe, this is already the second time in a Maimer that the Rebbe actually mentions it in that period of time. The Rebbe talks about the Rambam, and I believe it was at that time that they began learning something called Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, the laws of the sanctification of the new moon, which includes in it very complex calculations of when and where the moon will be visible. And the Rambam says something over there, which the Rebbe actually, I want to point this out here, let's read it inside first, and we'll talk a little more about it. Even though all wisdom in the world is sourced in the Torah. Like, for instance, the wisdom of the astronomy, that its source is in Torah. It's a positive mitzvah because we have to start the month when the moon will be visible, so you have to know when it could be visible, so that when witnesses come to testify that they saw it, those in the Beis Din in the court have to be knowledgeable to know if it was possible or not, if they're telling the truth, etc. So therefore it's a mitzvah to figure all that out, of the seasons and the celestial shapes and forms and orbits, etc. And indeed, the Torah says in Parshas Chanan, this is your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of all the nations. As the Gemara expounds on this and speaks about this. So from this we understand quite simply, the Rebbe says a statement, very interesting. So, and this is what I was referring to. He says, the Rebbe says, all the calculations of the astronomical function, etc., which are in the laws of the sanctification of the new moon in the Rambam, are Torah, are a portion of Torah, a part of Torah. Now, it's interesting, you could refer to this, the Rebbe discussed this elsewhere, but the Rambam himself says that there was the way the Chachamim had this, and we lost those books, and he says he's recording primarily what he got from different sources, which were sourced in Greek ways of making these calculations. But here the Rebbe says that although the Rambam says that we lost it as a historical fact, and that there are other, and the Rebbe says the Rambam there says that it's a chokhmah. He alludes to this, but here the Rebbe says it clearly that therefore, if the Rambam has it as the laws, it becomes Torah. It is Torah. It's already Torah, even though the Rambam himself says he took it from how the Greeks got it, which would originally have been from, like the Rebbe says here, everything comes from Torah. And even though we lost the direct sources, so this is an interesting point. And of course, we also may add that this is like not a subtle plug for learning Rambam, but just this is what was going on at the time. And the Rebbe has it here mentioned in the Maimer. So, of course, we all focus on this, and coming from Gimel Tammuz, certainly a time to strengthen our conduct in keeping the takonis, the institutions that the Rebbe instituted. Let's go back to the Maimer. So when you're talking about anything, any concept, any idea, it's because you had a feeling, a good feeling, or for that matter, a negative feeling about it. But that's why you discuss it. So it's in your midas. You have a feeling about it, and therefore you talk about it. Or for that matter, you do it. It's a deed, an action. And like it's explained at length in the Siddur that has the Hasidic Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe on the davening, which is put together by the Alter Rebbe, B'drush Admur Hazok and Admur Emtsoi, in the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe, the Middle Rebbe put that together. And actually, the Rebbe also instructed those that blow shofar in Rosh Hashanah to study one of these discourses, which is actually quite a lengthy discourse. Then it speaks about this idea. That although the Rebbe doesn't mention it here by name, that Maimer, but nevertheless, that's one of the Mamorim. That's the Maimer Lahavin Kir Shofar Al Pi Kavanas Baal Shem Tov, to understand how the mitzvah of blowing shofar according to the intent that the Baal Shem Tov taught about it. Anyway, in those Mamorim, it speaks about the following. So, the way it works with a person in the chain of creation, in terms of how it comes out within our soul, within our being and psyche, for instance, if a person has a thought to build a house, so how does that work? Why would one want to have a house, build a house? A person understands the pleasure of living in a home. If that's the case, then you have a will to have a home and build a home. Then it goes into the intellectual idea of how to make this happen, how to make it work. And then in your feelings, to really then make the connection from how much you would enjoy this and how great it would be in your life. And then you turn it into something that happens and build a home. Well, the stages that bring to when you want to talk about something. But then there's sometimes that there isn't the great feeling and emotion that's involved. It just goes, it's non-stop, straight from the idea, straight to either the action or the deed. By the way, this could be a good thing and this could be a negative thing in both senses. Although usually when it's negative, there's a piece of the midas, the feelings that came through also. But let's see what the Rebbe says here. Sometimes, so the Rebbe says, it comes straight from the intellect without the emotions and the characteristics. The person speaks and does because he understands this in his intellect. By the way, sometimes you see somebody who's a great genius or a scholar, sage, and we say in Yiddish, we say he's kalt. It's a little cold because it's without any feeling or emotion, because they're stating and they're so involved in some of the intellectual ideas. So sometimes then somebody will say they're lacking some, let's say, warmth or feeling, or something. You'd say, wow, this is just straight out, ideas, and it's not important then for the emotion. But that's the way it is. So the Rebbe explains, this is the gate of the courtyard which points inward or eastward. That's coming straight out of the intellect without the emotions. Oh, so that's when Rosh Chodesh work is permissible. Nevertheless, it's not considered a day of action and deed, because it's just coming without the interruption of the feelings and emotion. It's coming straight into work. The action is straight out of the wisdom, the intellect, without the intermediary of the characteristics, the midas, the feelings, etc. This we can understand the difference between Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. Each one has an advantage that the other one doesn't have. The yesh bazeh mashem bazeh. Hamayla Shabbos hi mashabei misalim leilam machshava shalom alam elam amaisa. The advantage of Shabbos is that everything ascends and everything is elevated to the world of thought, which is higher than the world of action and deed. It's more intimate. It's deeper within oneself. But then the action is lacking. Action is missing. Action is quite important and fundamental. So the advantage of the Chodesh is that the action, the deed of the day, is then in its complete fulfilled capacity is the best way possible. Mishum, and that's because then the action is coming straight out of intellect, like the Rebbe said, non-stop, straight, without the intermediary of feelings which can cloud things. But then it doesn't have the advantage again of Shabbos. Then everything is elevated to the thought, to the place of thought. So each one has something the other one doesn't have. So now we're going to get to the fact that when there's the fusion, let's say, of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh together, and they intersect, they come together, so then there has to be something very special. So now the Rebbe says, before he gets to that, he says, This is also the way it is even now, before the rebuilding of the temple with the coming of Mashiach. But when Mashiach comes, then Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, will be even in a greater plane, in a greater level. Then every Rosh Chodesh will have its special aspect of Rosh Chodesh, and every Shabbos, like it says, Hainu Chodshei Shel Chodesh v'Shabbatei Shel Shabbos Kivur in Yonim Behadrushim. There'll be something very special about each Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Chodesh, and each Shabbos. And the idea of Shabbos, when it's Shabbos Kivur, like explains in the Mamorim, Shalochin, and therefore Dafka us. Therefore, when Mashiach comes, we'll have to go to the temple, to the Beis Hamikdash, every Rosh Chodesh and every Shabbos, something which is, even at the time when the temple stood, that wasn't an obligation. That wasn't important. They only had to go on the 3 festivals, the Sholosh Regalim. But when Mashiach comes, it'll be every Shabbos and every Rosh Chodesh. Don't worry about the transportation. It will go very easy. That's some of the key things there. We'll be flying on clouds. So, Shalach and Dafka Jov Kobos Lishtachveis Lefonai Meeday Chodesh B'Chodshei Meeday Shabbos Shabbatei. So every flesh, every person will come bow before me every single Rosh Chodesh and every single Shabbos. Hainu D'Lasid Lovei Tia Aliyah L'Regel B'Chol Shabbos of B'Chol Chodesh. So Mashiach comes. The going up for what's now known as the festivals will be each and every Shabbos and every Rosh Chodesh. Like the Medrash explains that will be on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh like it was on the 3 festivals when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. And this is what it means when it says in the Haftarah, in the end of the Haftarah, that it'll be every single Rosh Chodesh. That's what it says. It will be in the future tense. And it'll be with happiness. Because anytime it says, every time the Talmud tells us that every time it says in the word V'hoya, it's associated with happiness. That's what it says in the Medrash. And then every flesh, and explicitly the most physical, carnal flesh, will come specifically to bow before me, to submit. The submission, the bowing, will be, even in the lowest levels, will be able to submit to God. B'chinas basar, this flesh. I'm sorry. Now the Rebbe says, in that Haftarah, there was the confluence of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, and then the Rebbe says there's something else, because it wasn't just one day Rosh Chodesh, it was 2 days Rosh Chodesh. So since there will be a second day Rosh Chodesh the next day, Sunday, so the Rebbe says there's something in addition that's on this Shabbos. And we had it, of course, this past Shabbos too. So then Shabbos Shabbos the Chodesh. So in addition to the fact that it's Shabbos and it's Chodesh, that we say the Haftarah of Hashemayim Kisi, that's the beginning of the Haftarah, that God says that the heaven is my chair, and then it includes and it concludes with the verse that it'll be every single month. Everyone will go and everyone will bow, etc. There's actually another verse that has a negative connotation, those that don't do it, and then because you're never supposed to finish off with something that tough, so it's customary to read again the second to the last verse of chapter 66, so that really would be the last verse. And even when it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, that's how it's done. You read that verse, then V'hoyu Deiroin, that other verse, go back to V'hoyu Midei Chodesh, and then the Rebbe is going to talk about now what you do when it's also Erev Rosh Chodesh. He, Erev Rosh Chodesh, the Haftarah Shabbos Erev Rosh Chodesh, he, Vayem Eloheinus L'mocha Chodesh V'nifkat Toki Yipoket M'shavechem. Now when it's a Shabbos, that is the day before Rosh Chodesh, let's say Rosh Chodesh is on Sunday, or even if it's Sunday and Monday, so that Shabbos we read the whole Haftarah from Samuel, the story of David and Jonathan. And when it's like this, so after we read the whole Haftarah of Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, we also read the first and last verse of that Haftarah. And that Haftarah begins with, like the Rebbe states here, and Yohanan said to David, tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh, and we will remember you because your seat will be empty. If you remember the story, David had to go to the family, and of course King Shaul is very upset by this, and he upsets him, and as is well known. Was and here the Rebbe mentions the very the famous teaching that the Rebbe teaches in many places. The irony of the word, the Hebrew word and the Hebrew root, is Peikuv Dalet, and the Rebbe says V'nifkadeta v'chi yipoket ein beis havchim. It has the same root, and one means that you will be remembered, you'll be recalled, you'll be the topic of conversation. Why? Because your seat will be empty. The word for your seat being empty is yipoked. and it's linguistically we understand this to be, in the etymology of the word, is because it's empty, we think about what we don't have. So v'nif kadeta, you will be remembered, ki poked mishavecha, because your seat will be remembered because you're not in it. So we'll say, hey, who's missing? Whose seat is open over there? So the Rebbe points that out. V'nifkato, v'nifkat means we'll remember you. Yipoket means that he's not there, and because he's not there, that brings about that we think about it. So Chassidus explains the way that somebody is really able to be remembered is by lacking, by not being there. So this means through your total submission and being subservient, and in a true serious way, that therefore you're lacking yourself, you're not the one, you're subservient to something else, to something greater, you're part of a greater thing. So through however great the bittul may be, this submission and nullification, subservience, Yipoket, then you remember, because the less you are of yourself, the more you're part of the greater thing. So you're remembered. Then you're remembered, you're part of the greater thing by being remembered. And this is the connection to that you should be remembered because you'll be lacking to the idea of the tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh. And the Rebbe says something here. On Rosh Chodesh, that's when the new moon is born. Before the new moon is born, before it's visible, it's not visible at all. So when it's born, that's when we remember it. This happens because it wasn't visible on the day before Rosh Chodesh. Then the moon is totally subservient. You can't even see a sliver, even a dot of the moon. And then it once again reappears, and you have the birth of the moon on Rosh Chodesh. And this is also the connection of the end of the statement of Yohanan to David, that he says tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh. Ki David, and why is this whole story of David and Yohanan? So the idea, what's the connection also with the whole idea of Rosh Chodesh and Erev Rosh Chodesh to David and Yohanan? So the Rebbe says, Ki David u'bechinas Malchus Siyana. David is the idea of Malchus, which is the seventh Sphira, which is a Sphira which has nothing on its own, but is the culmination and inclusion of all the other Sphiras together. It's royalty, just like the king and kingdom is the sum of all of its subjects, and it has to also then provide for all the subjects. So that's the idea of the moon, Sihara, because the moon gets all of its light from the sun. Yohanan ben Shaul and Jonathan Yohanan was the son of King Shaul. Yohanan ben Shaul, who bechinas Shimsha. That's the idea of the son, Shemimenu nishba leDavid, from him the energy was given off to David. Vayidei abitl the David bechinas malchus, and through David's submission and subservience, in the idea of being the level of malchus. Masha be'erev Chodesh mistateres halavana, on the day before the Chodesh, the moon is hiding malchus legamri, completely. It's nothing, as nothing, not even a speck. That makes the next day Rosh Chodesh, something special. It gets all the energy, and it becomes the head of the month. And like the end of that story is that they were both sobbing together in an embrace, and then David regained his composure first, and he said that just like we have sworn, our children and our offspring will be supportive of each other forever. And like the Mamorim explained this whole idea, so that Malchus is able then to, Malchus is both a recipient and a purveyor. And that's also the idea of the female sphere, as is understood. V'hinei mashen is bar li'il b'inyin v'hoy midachedesh b'chodshei midashabbos b'shabbatei u'v'inyin ki v'nifkarta ki poged mishavecha. Now the Rebbe goes on to say something, and this is not usual in most Mamorim, and we're getting to this piece. So the Rebbe says, that which is explained earlier, and this idea of every single month and every single Shabbos, that you'll be remembered because your place will be open. This is what the Rebbe explained. He says this is the gist of the explanation in the Chassidus of the Rebbeim, our masters. Now the Rebbe is going to say, the Rebbe will ask and talk about this a little bit more. That which is explained in most of the Mamorim that talk about what is that this verse of every single month, these ideas that we discussed about the advantage of Shabbos, how special Shabbos is, and how special Rosh Chodesh is, that Shabbos is elevating and Rosh Chodesh is bringing everything down to in straight out of Chokhmah. But from the fact that we read this on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, there really also has to be the advantage of the confluence of where they're both together, not just each one's special factors being on their own. Shabbos by itself, Rosh Chodesh by itself. But when Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh come together, there must also be something very special. You have to understand what the explanation of this. And then the Rebbe says, he's not going to explain it. This is leaving us something to work on, but the plot thickens. And also the idea of, and you will be remembered because your place is open. So we explained that on the day before Rosh Chodesh is when the submission and subservience is. You're missing. And when will you be remembered? That you'll be remembered in the birth of the moon. The next day in Rosh Chodesh itself. Then if that's the case, the Rebbe says, here's another great question. How could you say this Haftarah on the day before Rosh Chodesh? Then we must say that if it's Erev Rosh Chodesh, you already have something special about Rosh Chodesh in and of itself, because we're talking about the importance of Rosh Chodesh, even though it wouldn't be yet Rosh Chodesh. And all these things that we spoke about until we say that David regained his composure in a greater way. First, all these things that we spoke about earlier, this is only the next day when it happened. So in the story it says tomorrow it's going to be Rosh Chodesh. Then we say this whole thing, and then we talk about all the greatness of Rosh Chodesh. Chassidus explains all this, and we would read it when it's not yet Rosh Chodesh. Now it happens to be that in this case we're reading it on Rosh Chodesh and it's Erev Rosh Chodesh. The Rebbe says, so here's the explanation. The that the next day will be Rosh Chodesh. This is the idea of how the Rosh Chodesh and the month is in the world. But, in other words, But in Torah, you have everything, even when it's not yet the time. So, al yedei she'em nizav Haftarah, through that which we say it the day before Haftarah. Now, so the Rebbe explained that his question isn't so great because in Torah you could already have it included, even though it didn't happen yet, and therefore we could read about it today, even though the whole thing is tomorrow. But then it gets more complex because here you do have it, and it's Rosh Chodesh, and it's Rosh Chodesh. But even that gets even more complex because, according to the reason why we have 2 days Rosh Chodesh is to remember the times that they used to set up for Rosh Chodesh. But whenever, if no witnesses came to report on the sighting of the new moon, then there was the next day for Rosh Chodesh, and so that to commemorate that we have 2 days Rosh Chodesh now. So the Rebbe says if we still have to understand Teichen Inyan, also what is this really the significance of this? V'hasbara, and the explanation, much better Rosh Chodesh, Kayeshna Inyan, Rosh Chodesh, on Erev Rosh Chodesh, we already have Rosh Chodesh, and again the Rebbe says, he leaves us here and he tells us, Ve'enka Makoyim, this is not the place. So now the Rebbe says something phenomenal, which like we pointed out, is really not usual in the Rebbe's Mamorim. Because the Rebbe said here in the Maimer 2 things that he says he's leaving without an explanation. And he says this is not the place for it. And this is what he said 40 years ago. Now let's continue. Look inside. Follow. Listen. Open your heart. Open your eyes. Open your ears and open your mind. V'hinei b'chol hanal, in all of this discussion, al kol echad v'achas mutelas acheva, each and every one, every individual, it's incumbent upon them, they have the obligation. Lihishtadl b'havonas inyonim, to work real hard, to try real hard to understand these things. Shebechsidis, that we learn in the teachings of Chassidus. Ba'reirotz, and Rabbi saying in Nisiyenu, what was the will? What is the will of our Rabbeim and our masters? When you learn something, you have to understand it and you have to grasp it. In your soul, in your wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, you have to get it. The Rabbeim were called the Rebbes of Chabad, of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, to grasp it, to understand it specifically. And not just in a way of that I have made a statute and have decreed a decree. Now, just pointing out quickly that the parsha that week was Chukas when the Rebbe said this. So it's not just a way that I just said so and that's it. We have to understand it. We have to get it and grasp it. And the Rebbe says, like it says in the verse, that about a statute of God, and you have no permission then to think, because we have to fulfill every decree and every law that God made, even the ones that don't make sense necessarily. But that's not how we have to learn Torah there, and that's not how Chassidus is supposed to be known. So the Rebbe says, true that when we have to do it whether how, doesn't matter to what degree we understand it. With the various levels of understanding and comprehension, doesn't make a difference. We have to do it because then we have to do it. Like it's a statute which God made. And when somebody knows Chassidus, he knows with complete, he's completely certain that the things that are said by our Rabbeim and our masters, look at this, that the Rabbeim, shehem smuchim ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu, they have like smicha, a person from another person, another rabbi to rabbi, till Moshe Rabbeinu. Heim amiti betachlis, they are the ultimate truth. They are totally authentic and true. And our Rabbeim, the masters who said the Mamorim, they certainly understood all this. And the person learning knows that we have to indeed be careful and accurate in how the Rebbe said it. But nevertheless, we have to work very hard that we should be able to grasp and understand in our own mind, in our own thought process and understanding, in our own intellect, we have to understand this. And when we don't understand tzorich levakesh, we have to seek out and be able to understand. Here we say, and this is how the Rebbe said it in Yiddish, Kumen und klappen auf den Tier in Mitternacht. Come and bang on the door middle of the night. Don't sleep. Know that it's available. You have to seek it out. She has bidol that they should explain him what this means. Look what the Rebbe says, and this is the reason that they weren't explained. So that's what the Rebbe is saying, why he's not answering the question, so that we should work hard and be able to learn this. So that we should seek it out and pursue it and learn it. To come and to bang on the door. You have to work hard to understand these things. And our sages said that if you work hard, if you toil, you will and then you'll find, and you will that can be believed. Now this is a very interesting diuk. The way the Rebbe explains this, it's the Gemara Megillah. It says if a person will say that I tried but I didn't, and when we translate this in English, it's the wrong translation. But it's just the nuance. We say, I tried and I didn't succeed, don't believe him. Because if you tried, then you will succeed. It's over there. There. You try, so if you, that means to say that if you really try, you will succeed. You don't have to give up. And if you didn't succeed, that's a proof that you didn't try. So the Rebbe nevertheless points out that what it really says here is umatzasa, you will find. If you try, you'll find. When you find something, that means you were working, and you just got something. You came across it right away. You found it. So he says like this. This is about anything. The rule is if you try, you'll succeed. No matter what it is that you're talking about. So for sure, it's certainly that way in Torah. If you work hard, you'll be able to get it. You'll understand. So the Rebbe says, he's not going to explain it. You'll work hard, you'll pursue, you'll bang at the door, you'll get it. And through the working hard, you'll get the success. Now the success here is the same word as if you find something of a lost object, which really, you never worked hard to find a lost object. You just came upon it. You just came upon it by mistake, so to speak. Something was laying there and you saw it. But the result is that you got something so much greater than what it was that you were doing. What were you doing? You were just walking down the street. If you work hard, then your success will be so much more than even how hard you tried. We put in as best we can, the result will be so much greater, not even relative to what you put in, but even that much greater, like something that you find on the street and you didn't do anything for it. You just walked. But you did a little bit, something, but you got something so much greater. But when you find something, what do you got to do? You got to bend down and pick it up. You can't just leave it there. So therefore, there's work to do. You just have to bend down and pick it up. In other words, you have to do something and you'll get it. And then here the Rebbe says another thing which we don't see commonly in Hamaimer. Like it says in Isaiah, that there will be a spirit that will be bestowed upon them from above. From our Rabbeim. That they have their smicha, so to speak. They are appointed one person to person all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. The Yesed al Kain, and more than that. And this is the Maimer that we, like we said at the outset, is the Maimer before Gimel Tammuz. V'yeser al kein, not only are they musmach ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu, that they are the ones one-to-one till Moshe Rabbeinu. The ispashtus of the Moshe b'chol dora v'dora. There is the offshoot of Moshe in every single generation. V'hanasi hu hakoil, the nasi, the master, the prince is everything. Shehem noistim sakoil, they give you everything. Koil uzesh advarim and almodim b'chsidis, including this, that the concepts and the things that we learn in Chassidus, yiyu muvanim gam b'chabad, they'll be understood also in our wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Ubefrat bedash and especially in the knowledge that you actually get it, and that includes all the other spheres and everything else, like it says in the Zohar. And then the mind can influence the midas properly. This is also an uncommon thing, but the Rebbe says that the things that you will learn in Chassidus will become flesh and blood as part of you. Usually we say that about when you eat food, it becomes part of your actual makeup of what you are, your flesh and blood. Here the Rebbe says also what you study is going to become part of your makeup in a physical sense. And this is also not something that the Rebbe says commonly. This will affect your action and how you act. It'll permeate all of your existence. And you'll know God in everything that you do. Like the verse says. And through studying Chassidus and working hard and understanding the things that are learned, so that's the whole idea of spreading the well springs to the outside, the well springs of the Chassidus. Like Moshiach told the Baal Shem Tov that he's going to come when his well springs, the well springs of the teaching of Chassidus, will be actually spread to the furthest part of everywhere. And the Rebbe expounded on this saying and this topic many times. Through this, indeed, we'll have the result of the master, the king who's Mashiach, will come, Bekor of Mamish, speedily, actually. L'chaim.